I thought the lottery had finally given me peace, until a quiet warning shattered everything. While celebrating my $8 million win in a hospital cafeteria, when I stepped away for a phone call, I saw my son doing something with coffee cups. When I came back, something felt wrong. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't make a scene. I simply switched the coffee cups. 15 minutes later, my own son began to collapse, and the truth I uncovered next changed my family forever. Before I tell you everything, take a moment to support this one. Stay with me, subscribe to the channel, and share in the comments where you're watching from. It helps these stories reach people who may need them more than they realize. Now, let me take you back to how this all began. 3 months earlier, I was doing what I had done almost every Saturday for more than 20 years. I stood in line at a small convenience store on Alder Lane, newspaper tucked under my arm, waiting for my coffee to finish brewing while I scratched a lottery ticket on the counter. My wife, Helen, used to tease me about this habit. She said it was my way of keeping hope alive. She had been gone 4 years by then, taken by cancer that burned through our savings faster than we ever imagined. Before she passed, she made me promise I wouldn't stop playing. Someone has to win eventually, she'd say. Why not you? That morning, the numbers appeared so neatly that I assumed I'd misread them. I checked once, then again. Then I pulled out my phone and checked the official site. My hands started shaking. I sat down hard at the small table by the window because my legs simply stopped cooperating. When I called the lottery office, the woman on the other end didn't congratulate me. She asked me to come in immediately. The following weeks blurred together. Lawyers, financial planners, paperwork thicker than anything I'd ever seen in my 40-plus years working construction. I chose the lump sum without hesitation. I didn't want decades of reminders or public attention. After taxes, the number settled just over $8 million. It was more money than I had earned in my entire lifetime. Enough to finally breathe. Enough to attract attention I wasn't prepared for. The first person I told was my daughter, Laura. She lived across the country, worked in healthcare, and had built a quiet, stable life for herself. When I told her, she cried, not because of the money, but because she knew what it meant. Security. Relief. She told me Mom would have been proud. She also told me to be careful. That warning stuck with me. My son called later that evening. Nathan was my firstborn, 46 years old, smart, ambitious, always chasing the next opportunity. His wife Lane had expensive taste and restless eyes. Helen never trusted her. 6 months before she died, she pulled me aside after a family dinner and whispered, "Watch her around Nathan. She married potential, not the man." I dismissed it then, blaming pain medication and exhaustion. Standing in my kitchen with the phone pressed to my ear, I heard that same warning echo in my mind. Nathan's voice was full of excitement, almost too full. "Dad, this is incredible. We have to celebrate. Elaine, and I want to take you out somewhere nice." I agreed. Family was family. And part of me still wanted to believe I was wrong to doubt him. The calls started coming more often after that. Ideas disguised as concern. Suggestions framed as help. Investments. Businesses. Properties. Each conversation left me feeling drained instead of excited. When I pushed back, he laughed it off. "I'm just looking out for you, Dad." Then came my routine checkup at Riverside Medical Center. Nothing serious. Just the usual blood pressure monitoring for a man my age. I was finishing up paperwork when Nathan called. "Where are you?" "At the hospital." "Perfect," he said too quickly. "We're nearby. Let's grab lunch. We need to talk." That should have been my warning. They arrived together, smiling like nothing was wrong. Elaine wore designer sunglasses indoors and carried herself like she already owned the room. Nathan insisted on buying lunch, which meant I paid when he realized he'd left his wallet in the car. We sat in a quiet corner of the cafeteria, away from the noise of visitors and nurses. Nathan launched into another pitch. A commercial property. Huge returns. Limited risk. Elaine placed her hand on his arm, guiding the conversation without saying much. I shut it down calmly. I told them my financial advisor already had a plan. The temperature at the table dropped instantly. Elaine excused herself and returned moments later carrying 2 coffees from the kiosk. Identical mugs, except one had a small chip on the rim. She slid one toward Nathan and one toward me, smiling sweetly. "Let's not fight," she said. "We're family." I picked up the chip mug. That was when my phone rang. It was my financial advisor, calling to confirm the final transfer details. I stood up and stepped into the hallway for better reception. The call lasted only a few minutes. When I came back, I saw Nathan reaching across the table, his hand hovering near both cups. I bumped his arm as I sat down. Coffee sloshed. Napkins flew. In the brief chaos of cleaning up, the mugs shifted. The chipped one ended up in front of him. Something in me noticed. I didn't move it back. We talked for another 10 minutes. Nathan pushed harder. Elaine watched me closely, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. Then Nathan lifted his coffee and took a long drink. 5 minutes later, his face went pale. "I don't feel good," he muttered. That was when I knew. And that was only the beginning. Nathan's hand started trembling. So badly, the coffee sloshed against the rim of the mug. Sweat broke out across his forehead in uneven patches, and his jaw tightened as if he were fighting nausea. Elaine leaned forward instantly, her chair scraping the floor. "What's wrong?" she asked too fast. "Did you forget to eat again?" "I don't know," Nathan muttered, my head spinning. I didn't answer. I didn't move. Years on construction sites and tutors overseas had taught me something important. When something goes wrong suddenly, the people who cause it panic first. Elaine's eyes flicked from Nathan's face to the coffee cup, then, just for a split second, to my untouched mug. Her breath caught. She recovered quickly, placing a hand on Nathan's arm. "We should go," she said. "Now." "I think we should call someone," I replied, already standing. "This doesn't look right." "No," she snapped, louder than she intended. A few heads turned. She lowered her voice. "It's probably his blood sugar. He didn't eat breakfast. We'll take him home." Nathan swayed as he tried to stand. His knees buckled, and he grabbed the edge of the table, knocking his tray to the floor. That was when I stopped caring about appearances. I waved down a nurse who was walking past. "My son needs help. Right now." The nurse took one look at him and immediately called for assistance. Within seconds, 2 more nurses arrived with a wheelchair. Nathan's pupils were dilated. His breathing was shallow and uneven. Elaine hovered too close, wringing her hand, repeating, it's fine," like she was trying to convince herself. They wheeled him toward the emergency wing. I followed. Elaine tried to pick up the coffee cups from the table. "Leave those," the nurse said sharply. "We need to know everything he had." The cups were bagged and labeled before Elaine could protest. In the emergency waiting area, Elaine sat several chairs away from me, clutching her phone but not using it. She wasn't calling family. She wasn't texting. She was staring at the screen, like it might tell her what to do next. 30 minutes passed. Then a man in a security uniform approached me. His name badge read H. Miller. I'd seen him around during previous visits. Solid build, calm eyes, the kind of man who noticed details. "Sir," he said quietly, "can I speak with you?" We stepped into a hallway. "I was monitoring the cafeteria cameras earlier," he continued, clearly uncomfortable. "I noticed something odd at your table while you were away on the phone." He pulled out his tablet and turned the screen toward me. The footage showed Elaine reaching into her purse. A small plastic packet. Nathan leaned in. He looked around. Then, very clearly, he opened the packet and poured its contents into one of the coffee cups. The one with the chip. My chest tightened. "I wasn't sure what I was seeing at first," Miller said. "But after your son collapsed, I reviewed it again. I've already contacted hospital administration and local police." I nodded slowly. "Thank you." When we returned to the waiting room, Elaine was gone. A nurse told me she'd stepped outside. I didn't believe that for a second. I walked toward the main exit and saw her just as she pushed through the doors, her coat half on. "Elaine," I said. She spun around, eyes wild, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "I can't do this," she whispered. I can't. Can't do what? I asked evenly. She broke. It wasn't supposed to be him, she sobbed. It was supposed to be you. Just enough to make you confused. Disoriented. We had paperwork ready. Power of attorney. We were going to say you were declining. The words hit harder than any punch I'd ever taken. You were going to drug me. I said, your husband's father. We're drowning, she cried. The house is about to be taken. Nathan's deals are failing. That money could save us. And you don't even need it. You're old. You're alone. 2 police officers stepped up behind her. Ma'am, one said, we need you to come with us. Elaine tried to pull away. She didn't get far. In the ER, the doctor confirmed what I already suspected. A sedative, mixed with another drug that reacted dangerously with blood pressure medication. If I'd drunk that coffee, it could have caused a stroke or worse. Nathan survived. He woke up hours later, confused and weak. When he saw me standing there, his face crumpled. I'm sorry, he whispered. I didn't answer. The investigation moved fast. The footage. The forged documents found in Elaine's purse. The drugs traced back to a prescription she'd filled weeks earlier. Both were arrested. That night, I went home alone. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the same spot where I'd scratched that lottery ticket months earlier. Helen's voice echoed in my head. Clear as day. Watch her around him. She had been right. And now I had to decide what to do next. The night after the arrest, sleep never really came. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the familiar sound of my house, and realizing how close I'd come to never hearing them again. The ticking clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint creak of old wood as the temperature shifted. Ordinary sounds that suddenly felt like proof of survival. By morning, the reality settled in with a weight I couldn't shake. My own son had looked at me across a cafeteria table and believed I was expendable, not inconvenient, not difficult, expendable. That truth hurt more than the thought of the drugs, more than the police lights, more than the whispered confession in the hospital hallway. The detectives arrived mid-morning. 2 of them, calm, methodical. They asked me to walk through everything again, how the lunch was arranged, the coffee, the phone call, the switch. I answered without embellishment. Facts were enough. They always are. They told me Elaine had been charged first. Conspiracy, attempted poisoning, fraud. Nathan would be charged as well. His involvement was clear on the footage. They asked if I planned to press charges. Yes, I said without hesitation. The word surprised even me, but once it was spoken, it felt solid. This wasn't anger. This was necessity. If I shielded him now, I would be helping him destroy himself further, and I wasn't willing to do that. My daughter Laura arrived the next morning on the earliest flight she could find. She walked into my living room, took one look at me, and wrapped her arms around me like she was afraid I might disappear if she let go. I told her everything. She cried. Then she got quiet. Then she got angry in a way I hadn't seen since we lost her mother. How could he? She asked. How could he do that to you? I don't know. I said honestly, I don't think he knows either. The hospital called that afternoon. Nathan was stable. No permanent damage. He'd be transferred to a monitored unit for observation. I didn't go see him. Not yet. I wasn't ready to look at his face and pretend this was something smaller than it was. The days that followed blurred together. Statements. Lawyers. More statements. My financial advisor suggested security measures, relocation, asset protection. I listened, but my mind was elsewhere. Money felt abstract now. Secondary. Like something that belonged to a different life. What stayed with me was the moment Elaine said it wasn't supposed to be him, as if that detail somehow mattered. The district attorney contacted me directly. They had more than enough evidence, she said. The video footage, the drugs, the forged power of attorney documents. The intent was clear. She asked again if I was willing to testify. Yes, I repeated. When Nathan was formally charged, I was notified immediately. Attempted poisoning, conspiracy, fraud. The words looked unreal on paper, like they belonged to someone else's family. But they didn't. Laura stayed with me for a week. She cooked, cleaned, sat with me in the evenings without pushing conversation. Her presence grounded me, reminded me that not everything had been taken. I finally went to see Nathan 2 weeks later. The visiting room smelled like disinfectant and old fear. He looked thinner already, his confidence stripped away, replaced by something fragile and unfamiliar. He sat down across from me and stared at his hands. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. I didn't respond right away. "Why?" I asked. He swallowed hard. I was drowning. Every bad decision I ever made caught up with me at once. The house, the debt, the pressure. Elaine kept saying it was our only way out. "And you believed her," I said. "Yes," he whispered. "And worse," I agreed. I leaned back in the chair, studying the man in front of me, not the boy I remembered, not the son I raised. A stranger shaped by choices I hadn't seen clearly enough. "You were willing to drug me," I said. "You were willing to let them call me confused. Incapable. You were willing to take everything." Tears streamed down his face. "I know. I hate myself for it." "Hate doesn't fix anything," I replied. "Responsibility does." He nodded. "I'll take whatever punishment comes." That was the first honest thing he'd said. The trial moved quickly. The evidence left little room for argument. Elaine's lawyer tried to paint her as a mastermind, Nathan as a weak man manipulated by desperation. The footage destroyed that narrative. He'd held the packet. He'd poured the contents. He'd chosen. When the verdict was read, the courtroom went silent. Guilty on all counts. Nathan received 4 years. Elaine received 6. I didn't feel relief. I felt finality. Outside the courthouse, a man approached me. He introduced himself as Miller, the security officer who'd reviewed the footage and trusted his instincts enough to act. "You saved my life," I told him. He shook his head. "You saved yourself." I just paid attention. I made sure his own life changed after that. Quietly, deliberately, because integrity deserves recognition. Months passed. The house felt too big some days, too quiet others. I spent a lot of time in the garden, finishing things Helen had started but never completed. I planted roses where she'd planned to, fixed the roof she complained about for years. The lottery money remained mostly untouched. I didn't rush decisions anymore. I'd learned what rushing cost. Nathan wrote letters from prison. At first, they were full of apologies, then explanations. Eventually, they became quieter, more reflective. He talked about classes he was taking, about working in the library, about seeing men who'd lost everything and realizing how close he'd come to joining them. I didn't write back right away. Time, I decided, was part of the lesson. I thought often about the coffee cup, the chip on the rim, the instinct that told me not to switch it back. That small, unexplainable hesitation had changed the trajectory of every life involved. And for the first time since Helen died, I felt something steady beneath the grief and shock. Clarity. Whatever came next, I would face it with my eyes open. The weeks after the verdict moved at a strange pace, slow in the mornings, heavy at night, and somehow rushed in between. Life didn't pause just because my family had shattered in a courtroom. Bills still arrived. The lawn still needed mowing. The sun still rose every morning as if nothing extraordinary had happened. That normalcy felt cruel at first, then grounding. Laura returned home, but she called every day. Sometimes we talked for an hour. Sometimes we sat on the phone in silence, each of us doing our own small tasks, just knowing the other was there. She never defended her brother. She never asked me to reconsider. She understood something instinctively that had taken me longer to learn. Love does not require blindness. I met with the district attorney again to finalize paperwork. She explained the long-term process, appeals that might come, media interest that would flare and fade. She warned me that some people would judge my decision, accuse me of choosing money over my son. I can live with that, I said. I couldn't live with pretending this didn't happen. The press called. I declined interviews. I didn't want headlines. I wanted quiet, My advisor helped shield me, set up trusts, move funds into structures designed for protection rather than growth. For the first time since winning, I felt in control of the money instead of hunted by it. One afternoon, I received a call from the hospital. Dr. Henson, the same physician who had treated Nathan in the ER, asked if I could stop by. When I arrived, he closed the door behind us. "I need you to understand something," he said carefully. "The interaction between the drugs and your medication could have been fatal. If you consumed that coffee, there's a real chance you wouldn't have survived." I nodded slowly. I already knew, but hearing it aloud settled something deep inside me. "Your instincts saved you," he continued. "Not luck. Instincts." I thanked him and left, sitting in my car for a long time before driving home. That was the moment the anger finally arrived, not explosive, not loud, but cold and steady. Anger not at Elaine alone, but at my own willingness to ignore warning signs for the sake of peace. I didn't want that anger to define me, so I gave it a job. I started making decisions. First, I set aside funds for Laura's children, education trusts, ironclad and untouched by anyone else. Then I created a charitable foundation in Helen's name, focused on cancer support and elder legal protection. I wanted no other family blindsided the way I had been. I also set aside a small, locked trust for Nathan, not for him, but for the possibility of his future children. Money he could never touch, but they might, if they grew into better circumstances than he had created. Some people would call that foolish. I called it boundaries with hope. Months passed. Seasons shifted. I visited Nathan for the first time since the trial near the end of winter. The prison visiting room felt colder than the hospital ever had. He looked older, quieter, less certain. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said as soon as we sat down. "I just wanted to thank you for coming." "I'm not here for closure," I replied. "I'm here for truth." He nodded, asked me anything. So I did, about the planning, about the moment he decided to go through with it, about whether he'd hesitated. He told me everything, not defensively, not dramatically, just facts. And in those facts, I heard something new, ownership. "I don't blame Elaine anymore," he said. "I chose this. I can't undo it, but I won't pretend it wasn't me." That mattered. When I left, I didn't feel lighter, but I felt steadier. There was a difference. Spring arrived slowly. I spent more time outdoors, repairing things Helen had meant to fix. The garden took shape. The roses bloomed. Neighbors waved but didn't pry. They sensed, perhaps, that this was not a season for questions. One Saturday morning, I returned to the same convenience store on Alder Lane. Same counter. Same lottery display. I bought a ticket, not because I expected anything, but because it reminded me of her. I scratched it home, smiled at the familiar ritual, and tossed it in the trash. I didn't need hope in that form anymore. What I needed now was intention, and I had plenty of that left. The months that followed settled into a rhythm I hadn't felt in years. Not peace exactly. Peace implies an absence of weight, but balance. The sharp edge of shock dulled. The anger I'd given purpose began to soften into something quieter and more useful. Clarity. I stopped answering unknown numbers. I reduced my world intentionally. Fewer conversations. Deeper ones. Less noise, more meaning. The money stayed where it was, protected and structured, doing nothing dramatic. For the first time since winning, I didn't feel watched. Laura visited again in early summer. She stayed a week just like before. We worked in the garden together, planting herbs where Helen once planned to. One afternoon, while we rested in the shade, she asked a question she'd clearly been holding back. "Do you ever feel guilty?" she asked carefully. "For what?" I replied, "For pressing charges. For letting it go this far." I thought about it. Really thought. "I feel sad," I said. "I feel disappointed. Sometimes I feel angry. But guilty? No. Guilt belongs to the person who crossed the line, not the one who refused to pretend it wasn't crossed." She nodded slowly. Mom would have said the same. That night, after she went to bed, I sat alone with one of Helen's old notebooks. She used to write thoughts down when she couldn't sleep. Half sentences, observations, small truths she didn't want to forget. One line stood out, written years before any of this happened. Love doesn't mean saving someone from consequences. It means loving them enough to let them face them. I closed a notebook and felt something inside me finally settle. Nathan's letters continued to arrive every few weeks. They changed in tone over time. The early ones were heavy with shame. Later ones spoke more about routine, work in the prison library, classes he was taking, conversations with men who had destroyed their own families in pursuit of quick fixes. In one letter, he wrote, "I used to think money solved problems. Now I see it just delays the truth until the damage is worse." That sentence stayed with me. I began visiting him monthly, not out of obligation, but intention. I didn't bring comfort. I brought consistency. We talked honestly, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes in silence. I never made promises I couldn't keep. I never offered absolution. I offered presence. He never asked for money. That mattered more than anything. In late summer, I met again with my advisor, not to invest, but to redirect. We finalized a foundation in Helen's name, legal protection for elders, counseling access for families navigating power of attorney issues, educational programs about financial abuse that doesn't look like abuse until it's too late. I didn't announce it publicly. I didn't want attention. I wanted impact. One afternoon, I received a letter from a woman I didn't know. She'd attended one of the foundation's early workshops. Her father had been pressured by a relative to sign documents he didn't understand. Because of what she learned, she intervened in time. "You saved my family," she wrote. I sat with that letter for a long time. The garden flourished that year. The roses bloomed fuller than I expected. Neighbors complimented them. I smiled politely and kept working. Tending living things felt grounding. Honest, plants don't lie. They respond only to care and neglect. As autumn approached, my health reminded me of its presence. Nothing alarming, just the subtle signals of age, a little less energy, a little more stiffness. I listened, adjusted, rested when needed. I had no desire to outrun time anymore. One crisp afternoon, I took a long drive through the outskirts of town, past old construction sites where I'd worked decades earlier, buildings I helped raise, foundations I helped pour. There was a strange comfort in knowing some of what I built would outlast me. I stopped at a diner Helen, and I used to visit on Sundays, ordered the same meal, sat in the same booth. The waitress didn't recognize me, but the place smelled the same, familiar, safe. As I paid the bill, I realized something unexpected. I wasn't thinking about Nathan, or Elaine, or the trial. I was thinking about what I wanted the rest of my life to look like. And for the first time in a long while, the answer didn't feel complicated. I wanted quiet mornings, honest conversations, boundaries that protected peace. I wanted to live without pretending. When I got home, I found another letter from Nathan waiting in the mailbox. Short this time. I started leading a small group here. Men with addiction issues. I tell them what I did. I don't sugarcoat it. I don't want them making my mistakes. I folded the letter carefully. That was growth. Not dramatic. Not cinematic. Real. As winter approached again, I realized I was no longer defined by what almost happened to me. I was defined by how I responded after. And that felt like the beginning of something solid. Not just an ending. By the time winter settled in again, I had learned something important about survival. It isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself with grand gestures or dramatic victories. Survival is quiet. It's waking up and choosing not to harden, even when you have every reason to. It's choosing not to shrink, either. The first snow came early that year. I watched it from the kitchen window, coffee warm in my hands, steam fogging the glass. Helen used to love the first snowfall. She'd say it made everything honest again, covered up the mess without pretending it wasn't there underneath. I finally understood what she meant. My routine had become simple. Mornings in the garden when weather allowed, reading in the afternoons, foundation work a few days a week, monthly visits to see Nathan, calls with Laura every Sunday evening without fail. No chaos, no surprises, That was intentional. Nathan had changed, not in a miraculous storybook way, but in a slow, earned one. He'd lost the sharp edges of entitlement. Prison does that to men who are willing to learn. He talked less about himself now and more about others, about the men he mentored, about the shame they carried, about the lies they told themselves before everything fell apart. One visit, he said something that stayed with me. "I used to think you were weak for not saying no enough," he admitted. "Now I see you were strong for believing in people longer than they deserved." I didn't answer right away. Belief without boundaries isn't strength. I finally said, "It's risk. I confuse the two. I won't make that mistake again." He nodded. He didn't argue. That told me more than any apology ever could. The foundation expanded quietly. Lawyers and social workers reached out. Hospitals asked for educational materials. I funded training programs for nurses to recognize signs of financial manipulation among elderly patients. The irony wasn't lost on me. What nearly destroyed me was now helping protect others. I never attached my name to it publicly. Helen's name was enough. One afternoon, a woman in her late 50s came to my home unannounced. She'd been referred by the foundation. Her brother had tried to force her into signing over property while she was recovering from surgery. She'd stopped it in time. She wanted to say thank you in person. As she spoke, her hand shook the same way mine had in that hospital hallway months ago. "You don't realize how invisible this kind of abuse feels," she said. "People think if no one hit you, nothing bad happened." I looked at her and saw myself. "It counts," I told her. "All of it counts." When she left, I sat for a long time in the quiet house. This was why I survived, not just to continue breathing, but to matter in ways I hadn't before. Spring returned slowly. The roses came back stronger than ever. I pruned carefully, deliberately, removing dead growth so new life could take its place. It felt symbolic without being sentimental. Laura visited again, this time with her children. Laughter filled the house in a way it hadn't for years. They ran through the halls, asked questions, wanted stories about their grandmother. I told them the good ones, the funny ones, the ones that reminded me love could be simple. That night, after everyone went to bed, Laura sat with me at the kitchen table. "You're different," she said gently. "I hope so. You're calmer, stronger, not guarded, just clear." That word again. Clear. Nathan was released on parole near the end of that year. I was notified a week in advance. I thought about whether I'd meet him at the gate. I decided not to. This part of his life needed to begin without me catching him if he stumbled. He moved into a halfway house, took a job at a hardware store, started attending addiction counseling daily. He didn't call asking for help. He sent a letter instead. "I'm doing this on my own. That matters to me now." It mattered to me too. Months passed. Slowly, carefully, he rebuilt. I watched from a distance, not interfering, not rescuing. When he finally asked to meet for lunch, I said yes. We chose a small diner, neutral ground, no hospital mugs, no chipped cups. He looked me in the eye when he spoke. No rehearsed lines, no desperation. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said. "I'm asking for time." "You have it," I replied. "What you do with it is up to you." That was the most honest exchange we'd had in years. As summer returned, I realized something quietly profound. I no longer replayed that cafeteria moment in my head. The fear had lost its grip. The memory remained, but it didn't control me. I had moved forward, not because I forgot, but because I understood. And that, more than the money, more than survival itself, was the real turning point. By the time the second summer after everything arrived, I understood that rebuilding isn't about returning to what was lost. It's about deciding what deserves to exist next. Nathan kept his distance at first after his release. That was his choice, and I respected it. He worked 6 days a week at the hardware store, took the early shift no one wanted, and volunteered in the evenings with a local support group for people battling addiction. He didn't tell me about it at first. I heard it from Laura, who had spoken to one of the counselors by coincidence. "He doesn't talk about money," she said on the phone one night. He talks about responsibility, about consequences, about you. That didn't make anything right, but it mattered. I agreed to meet him once a month, always in public, always on neutral ground. We didn't talk about the past unless he brought it up, and when he didn't minimize it. He didn't shift blame. He didn't ask for reassurance. He talked like a man who finally understood the weight of what he'd almost done. One afternoon, as we sat on a bench near the river after lunch, he surprised me. "I don't want anything from you," he said quietly. "Not now. Not ever. I just want to know how to be someone you don't regret." I thought about that for a long time before answering. "You don't get there by asking me," I said. "You get there by living in a way that makes the question irrelevant." He nodded. "That's what I'm trying to do." At the foundation, our work expanded again. Hospitals in neighboring counties requested training. Lawyers volunteered their time. Social workers brought cases that were chillingly familiar. Elderly patients pressured to sign documents while medicated, isolated from trusted contacts, rushed through decisions they didn't fully understand. Every time I heard one of those stories, I felt that old cold tighten in my chest, but it no longer paralyzed me. It sharpened me. We prevented several situations before they turned irreversible. Families reunited, assets protected, dignity preserved. Quiet victories that would never make headlines. That was enough. Laura's children spent more time at my house that summer. They helped me water the garden, asked questions about tools in the garage. One afternoon, my grandson asked why I had so many roses. "For your grandma," I said. He nodded seriously. "She must have been really special." "She was," I replied. "Still is." Nathan asked one evening if he could come by while the kids were visiting. He didn't assume. He asked. I said yes. The visit was awkward at first, careful, but the children had a way of breaking tension that adults never manage. They asked him questions. He answered honestly but simply. He didn't overstep. He didn't perform. When he left, my granddaughter hugged him without hesitation. That stayed with me. Later that night, Laura sat beside me on the porch. "I don't know if I could have done what you did," she said, letting him face consequences, letting him come back slowly. "I didn't do it for him," I said. "I did it so I could live with myself." She nodded. "That makes sense." As autumn approached again, I felt my age more clearly, but not in a fearful way. Just awareness. I scheduled my checkups, adjusted my routines, accepted help when needed. Pride had cost me enough already. One day, I received a handwritten note from a man Nathan had been mentoring. He wrote to thank me. Not for money, not for influence, but for allowing my son to speak openly about what happens when greed and fear override conscience. "He doesn't hide his mistakes," the man wrote. "That makes it easier for the rest of us to face ours." I folded the letter and placed it in Helen's notebook. When the anniversary of the lottery win came around, I didn't mark it. No celebration. No reflection ritual. It was just another day now. The money had done its work. So had the truth. Nathan continued to rebuild. Slowly, earnestly, he moved into a small apartment, bought second-hand furniture, cooked simple meals, lived within his means. He didn't chase shortcuts anymore. One evening, he asked if I considered coming to one of the support meetings. Not to speak, not to be introduced, just to sit in the back. I agreed, listening to him speak that night. To hear him describe, without excuses, how close he'd come to destroying everything was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but it was also one of the clearest indicators of change I'd seen. Afterward, he didn't look at me for approval. That mattered. When winter came again, I felt something close to peace, not because everything was healed, but because everything was honest. I had learned the difference, and I knew, with a certainty that didn't need reassurance, that whatever time I had left would not be spent pretending anymore. By the time the third winter rolled in, the sharp edges of everything that had happened no longer cut me open without warning. They were still there. Memory doesn't disappear just because time passes, but they had dulled enough to be handled. I had learned where not to grip too tightly. I had learned where to let go. Nathan's life continued to stabilize in ways that didn't make for dramatic stories, but felt far more convincing than any grand gesture ever could. He worked steadily. He showed up when he said he would. He paid his bills on time. He attended every meeting without fail. No shortcuts. No excuses. No hidden angles. The absence of chaos was, in itself, evidence. One afternoon, he asked if I would walk with him. Not meet. Not talk over lunch. Walk. We chose a long, quiet path near the edge of town where the trees grew thick and the traffic noise faded quickly. For a while, we walked without speaking. That silence didn't feel awkward anymore. It felt earned. I think about that day all the time, he said finally. The cafeteria. The coffee. So do I replied. I replay in my head, he continued. I think about how close I came to doing something I couldn't undo. I don't know how I became that person. I stopped walking and looked at him. You didn't become him all at once, I said. You became him a little at a time, through entitlement, through resentment, through convincing yourself that desperation justifies anything. The good news is you can unbecome him the same way, slowly, intentionally. He nodded, swallowing hard. I'm trying, he said. I really am. I can see that, I answered. And for the first time, I knew I meant it without hesitation. The foundation reached a point where it could operate without my constant oversight. I stepped back deliberately, appointing people who understood the mission wasn't about control, it was about protection. I stayed involved, but no longer needed to be at the center. That felt right. Laura visited again in early spring. We sat on the porch watching the garden come back to life. She told me about her work, about the kids, about small frustrations that felt refreshingly ordinary. Do you ever think about what your life would look like if none of this had happened? She asked. I considered the question carefully. Yes, I said, and I don't miss that version of it. She looked surprised. I was comfortable before. I continued, but I wasn't awake. Comfort made me overlook things I shouldn't have. I ignored instincts. I smoothed over problems instead of confronting them. I mistook peace for avoidance. And now I have peace that isn't fragile. She smiled softly. Mom would like that. I believe she was right. Nathan continued mentoring others, quietly becoming someone people trusted not because of authority, but because of honesty. One evening, he told me he'd been offered a role coordinating support groups in 2 neighboring counties. They asked me because I've lived it, he said, because I don't pretend. That's how change spreads, I replied, through people who tell the truth even when it costs them. He accepted the role, knowing it paid less than he could earn elsewhere. He didn't complain. That told me everything. Summer returned. The roses bloomed again, fuller each year. The house felt lighter, not because it was empty, but because it was no longer holding secrets. I invited friends over for dinner again. Simple meals, real conversation. No performances. Nathan joined once at my invitation. He didn't linger. He didn't dominate conversation. He didn't tell his story unless asked. When someone mentioned money, he changed the subject. That restraint spoke volumes. One afternoon, while organizing old papers, I found the original lottery ticket tucked inside a book Helen used to read. I held it for a long moment, then placed it back where it belonged. It had served its purpose. It didn't need reverence. What mattered now was what had grown afterward. I noticed my own reflection one morning and realized I looked different. Not older, just clearer, less guarded, less tense. The fear that once sat permanently behind my ribs was gone. I had survived something that could have destroyed me. And more than that, I had chosen what came next. Nathan and I spoke one evening about the future. Not in vague terms. In real ones. I don't know if we'll ever be what we were, he said. We won't, I answered. And that's okay. But do you think we can be something? He asked. I considered him carefully. Yes, I said, as long as it's honest. That answer didn't promise comfort. It promised truth. And he accepted it. As autumn approached again, I realized something quietly profound. I no longer define my life by the near miss. I define it by what I protected afterward, my dignity, my boundaries, my integrity. Money hadn't given me power. Clarity had, and that clarity, once earned, could not be taken from me again. By the time another year turned over, I stopped counting time by anniversaries of disaster. I no longer measured life by before and after cafeteria, or by court dates, or by the day the verdict was read. I measured it by quieter markers now. How well I slept, how often I laughed without forcing it, how steady my hands felt when I poured coffee in the morning. Nathan kept doing the work. That was the difference. Not words, not apologies. Work. He moved again, this time into a slightly better apartment. Still modest, still deliberate. He'd earned the upgrade without asking for it. He kept the same car, the same habits, the same meetings. He marked the sobriety milestones without ceremony. No speeches, no posts, just quiet acknowledgement and forward motion. One evening, he called me, not to talk about himself, but to ask advice. There's a man in my group, he said, older, estranged from his daughter. She won't speak to him because of money he lost years ago. He keeps asking me if he should just give up. And what do you think? I asked. I think giving up is easier than changing, Nathan replied. But I don't know how to tell him that without sounding preachy. I smiled to myself. Tell him the truth, I said. Tell him change doesn't guarantee reconciliation. It guarantees integrity. The rest is out of his control. He paused. That sounds familiar. It should, I said. You lived it. After the call, I sat for a long time thinking about how strange it was that the man who once nearly destroyed me was now asking how to help someone else avoid doing the same to themselves. Life has a way of folding back on itself like that. If you let it, the foundation continued without me at the center. That was intentional. I attended events when asked, but I no longer needed to oversee every detail. I trusted the people running it. Trust, real trust, had returned to my life, but it was no longer blind. It was earned. Laura's family visited for the holidays. The house filled with noise again. Footsteps, laughter, dishes clinking in the sink. The kind of noise that doesn't overwhelm, but reassures. Nathan joined us for one afternoon. He arrived on time, left on time, brought nothing but himself. That restraint mattered. After dinner, my grandson asked me a question that stopped me cold. Grandpa, he said, are you rich? I considered it. I used to think I was. I replied, now I know I am. Laura laughed. That's not what he meant. I know, I said, but it's still the right answer. Nathan looked at me then, not with guilt, not with hope, but with something steadier. Understanding. That night, after everyone left, I walked through the house slowly, turning off lights, straightening chairs. I paused in the doorway of the room Helen had used as a reading nook. The chair was still there, the lamp, the shelf of books she loved. I sat down and closed my eyes. For the first time since she died, I spoke to her out loud. You were right, I said softly, about all of it. The warning, the instincts, the belief that love without boundaries becomes something else entirely. I felt no sadness in that moment, only gratitude. She hadn't been there to stop what happened, but she'd been there to prepare me to survive it. Nathan and I met for coffee a week later. Real coffee, same diner, same mugs every time. I want to ask you something, he said carefully, and you can say no. Go on. I'm thinking about starting a program, he continued, for families dealing with addiction and financial abuse together. Not just addicts, not just victims. Both, because pretending they're separate doesn't work. I listened closely, not for ambition, for intention. And what do you want from me? I asked. Nothing, he said immediately. Not money, not connections, just perspective, if you're willing. I nodded. I am. That was the moment I knew we crossed into something new, not forgiveness, not restoration, but honesty. And honesty, I'd learned, was stronger than either. As spring returned, I tended the garden again. The roses bloomed fuller than ever. I pruned carefully, removing what no longer served growth. I noticed how natural that process felt now. Some branches don't recover. Others thrive when cut back. I received a letter one morning from someone I didn't know, a former client of the foundation. now volunteering to help others. She wrote one line that I folded and placed in Helen's notebook. Survival taught me who I am. Accountability taught me who I want to be. That felt like the full circle. Nathan married 2 years later, not quietly, but sincerely. Small ceremony. No extravagance. I attended. I stood in the back. I didn't give a speech. I didn't need to. When his first child was born, he called me. Not to ask for help, not to ask for money, but to tell me. She's healthy, he said, and scared me half to death. I smiled. Good, I replied. That means you understand the stakes now. We spoke more often after that. Not about the past, but about choices, about patience, about the kind of father he wanted to be. I never forgot what he'd done, but I also never pretended it defined everything he would ever be. That balance, memory without bitterness, was the hardest lesson of all. Now, as I write this, I'm older than I ever expected to be when I scratched that ticket. The money changed my life, yes, but not by giving me comfort. It gave me clarity. It revealed who people were when they thought no one was watching. It showed me the cost of ignoring instincts. It taught me that survival isn't about escaping harm. It's about refusing to become it. If there's one truth I'd leave behind, it's this: money doesn't corrupt character. Pressure exposes it. And when it does, you get a choice. You can look away and keep the peace. Or you can face the truth and earn something better. I chose the second path. And in doing so, I didn't just survive what nearly ended me. I built something honest in its place. Before you move on, do me one small favor. If stories about hidden betrayals, hard choices, and quiet strength speak to you, support the channel and let me know where you're watching from. Your engagement helps these stories reach people who might need them more than they realize.